Right. I think we must acknowledge that a reduction is a reduction and is a positive omen both for international community in terms of foreign direct investment and even local businesses. However, if you look at the reduction, it's a function of a drop in food inflation because it's not only the headline that is actually dropping, it's also food inflation that is dropping. You recall that President Muhammad Buhari over time, I mean President Bola Ahmed Tinubu actually said is going to declare emergency on food security about 3 years ago. Perhaps maybe this is part of the result we actually are seeing, and that's what we expect to see. However, they must not rest on their oars because it might be temporary, but we can be able to sustain it. So we can just be able to maintain it. My only fear is that CBN actually reported last week or thereabout that there is increase in inputs, and that's where my fear starts from. That are we going to sustain this drop in inflation? And according to CBN, there is a rise in the inputs of agricultural produce, manufacturing produce, and that may in turn return our inflation to be moving up ahead. And since they have actually identified that, I think it's a quick one for them to find a way to actually arrest that and to also continue to see that we have reduction in food inflation, which is the greatest catalyst that is bringing up inflation. Perhaps there are other macroeconomic indicators that we also need to look at, such as forex, retour, and other indicators.
Okay, despite the overall decline, I actually observed that food inflation rose to 3.25% in June 2025, up by 1.07% points from 2.19% in May 2025, with items like fresh pepper and meat, being the key culprits. How are these increases affecting Nigerian households, and what can be done to stabilize food prices?
And that's why we are actually happy that we have a drop in inflation, because the more we have drop in inflation, the more people's purchasing power increases. So the more we get to see a reduction in inflation, the more we have more purchasing power. And also, I think we're also in the rainy season, so we are expecting a kind of harvest, very soon also. So that will also help the food inflation to actually reduce. But, input is the major thing that we also need to look at this time.
Right. We also saw a slight increase in month-on-month inflation from 1.53% in May to 1.68% in June. Does this suggest that the downward trend might be fragile? And what short-term pressures could reverse these gains?
Right. Just like I said earlier, the downward trend of the inflation we might not be able to sustain it unless we try to do what we're supposed to do. And that's why I talked about the general macroeconomic indicator. One is our forex. You see that our forex also is gaining ground more. We must also make sure that in that area, we actually make sure that we tighten it down. Then we must also look at diaspora remittance. There must be much more. We must canvas for more investments in that area. I recall the government declared this bond also to attract more income into the nation. But if we can put all those things, apart from the challenges that pose through the CBN announcements that there's inputs, costs, rising inputs cost, I think that will be where we actually have challenges going forward. And that's why CBN must continue to put up different strategies to actually pay anything that will make our inflation to go up.
Okay, while Nigeria's inflation is easing, we are seeing increases in places like the US and UK, with inflation up by 0.3% to 2.7% and 3.6% respectively in June 2025. How do global economic trends influence Nigeria's inflation?
Right. So I think it has a significant impact. You recall that during the Trump trade decisions, that's a period, we actually have some challenges during the Trump issues. We recall that Trump declared that the tax and trade war is actually affecting inflation here and there. And a country that does not have enough shock absorber will definitely feel it. So we are not actually immune from it, but we have our own challenges already. But if we can ramp up our production more, because the economy is now also changing. Nigeria are now doing more of, it's now easy to actually export the more. We are exporting more compared to importing. Maybe because of the challenges that forests actually give to us, because people find it difficult to import this side because it's quite expensive to import, but we're doing much more of export. So government can also encourage that. So that would have given us balance of trade and balance of payments in Nigeria.
All right, with the Monetary Policy Committee meeting around the corner, how do you expect the CBN to respond to this trend? Should we expect a pause or even a rate cut, or will the Apex Bank maintain its tightening stance?
It's quite tricky and depends on their vote and their decision. But for me, in as much as we have downward we have been able to gain a downward trend in inflation. So I think the NPR is the major thing, which is has to do with interest rate. So for me, I think it's either they carry, they maintain the status quo, or they actually reduce it. It can be reduced because by reducing it, it's also a good optics for Nigerians, because by the time you reduce interest rates, manufacturers, small businesses, they can actually approach banks to actually gain more. So I expect them to either carry or reduce the NPR in the next MPC meeting.
What measures would you recommend to ensure this downward trend is sustained and not just statistical?
Right. I think the government needs to do more in terms of energy costs. You recall that our major problem is energy costs, but it's looking as if it's a kind of stable. We must do more. Government have CNG. Our CNG actually reflects in the